When we feel like we don't have a choice, we can easily get stuck. Emotionally, we start to feel bad. We start to feel discouraged. That then leads us to believe that we don't have a choice, that we're victim to this person or this situation or whatever the dynamic is that we're in. This is Becoming, the podcast for leaders to think differently with actionable tips in 30 minutes or less to claim your intuition, your influence, and your agency. And finally, get to the truth of what stands between you and who you are meant to become. Many of us believe that once we become that future self, then we will be happy, successful, and complete. This podcast exists to shine a light on the truth that the time is now and your future self can be who you become today. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome back, podcast listeners, to Becoming. This is the final episode today in our 8-part series that we have been diving into on addiction to awakening. This is the 8th episode for a very important reason and a very specific reason. And to say that I'm excited to dive into this would be a complete understatement, because this topic today has been one that has been my biggest breakthrough, my biggest aha, the hardest for me. And we're going to unpack this today, but know that we are going to be diving into this more and more on future episodes because there is so much here. So, like I said, this is the 8th episode for a reason. This is the big kahuna. This is the missing puzzle piece that's going to help you really bring home a new level of insight and breakthrough around the other addictions that we've gone through together already. And since it is the big kahuna, I want to invite you to consider approaching this episode today a little bit differently in the way that you consume this episode. And what I mean by that is, I know if you're like me, a lot of us consume podcasts while we're walking, while we are cleaning the house, while we are cooking, right? While we are multitasking. And today I want to invite you to consume this episode in a quiet space with a blank sheet of paper, your journal, a pen, a glass of water, tea or coffee, whatever your drink of choice is, and give yourself the opportunity to have the space to dive into this. I promise you, if you dedicate that focus and intentionality to this episode, the rewards that you will reap are truly profound, unlimited, and will allow you to have deeper insights that lead to breakthroughs. Out of all of the other addictions, this is the one that I want to invite you to consume in this way because it's truly the ultimate addiction that's interwoven into all the others. So let's dive in. As always, we're looking at ways to support you to consume this content and also process this content. And so be sure to check out in the show notes, we've provided a link to a PDF that will help you reflect on this information even more and take this information a step further. So be sure to check out the show notes, click on the link, and use the PDF of the reflection questions that we've prepared for you. Our 8th episode today on addiction to awakening is the addiction to our emotions. Emotions are fascinating, right? Emotions, broken down simply, is energy in motion, right? Our emotions are how we move through the world, but it's so deep within us. Most of the ways we use emotions is unconscious. We've been conditioned to believe that our emotions are reactions to other people, places, and things. And today I want to start this episode really with this approach. I want to invite you to join me in this approach of our emotions are our choice. We are choosing our emotions. And it's a complete paradigm shift, because up until this point, you likely have not thought of your emotions that way. The way that I know this is because you and I are very similar. We probably use language like, this person made me feel, or when I do this activity, I feel X. You can see in our language, we often refer to emotions as we explain them in the context of something's happening and we feel a certain way because of it. And today I want to flip that paradigm with you. And instead of, I feel this way because of that thing, I want to shorten the sentence. I feel this way, period, end of. When you don't then explain the reason, you stop putting the power outside of you. When you start really taking ownership by way of your language of, I feel this way and there isn't a reason why, even if in the moment you think there is, I want you to just put this into practice and really first bring your attention to how often as people we are always explaining we feel a certain way because of a person, place, or thing externally. We do something because of someone else, which makes us feel something. So it's very interesting when you start to look at this cascade effect and see how out of control we are as people with our emotions. I know this has been my truth for the majority of my life. I grew up very much in the space of being concerned about how everyone else was feeling. And if everyone else was okay, then I was okay, right? So my emotions, in a large part, were never really mine. They were an effect of my environment. And that's very much how we know that to be true as humans, right? And that's a big pill to swallow for me, especially when I started to see I was moving through the world and they weren't really my chosen emotions. It really hit home for me. It really sent me on this discovery journey, this journey of inquiry, this journey of questioning everything sometimes because I had put so much weight on my emotions. So I want you to consider this. We believe that our emotions are caused, but what if we together consider that they're chosen? If you look up the definition of emotions, they're automatic, unconscious, and ultimately a reaction. Some sort of stimulus in our environment is happening, whether that's a person, place, or thing, and we feel a certain way because of it. You can take this into your professional life, your career, your personal life, your relationships. At the end of the day, on some level, we speak about our emotions in a reactionary way. Our emotions are all based on reaction, and today is the day that changes. By your awareness alone, linking arms with me as we begin this journey on this podcast episode, you are going to have insights and make connections of how these emotions have been your ultimate addiction so that you can start to be free and stop living your life in reaction and move into creation, purposeful creation, and taking massive ownership of your life and your emotions and seeing how even though you're successful, even though you have fulfilled so many of your dreams, the thing that holds us back the most, that holds you back the most, is when you get caught up emotionally. And I know that was true for me too. It's like I am unleashed. I am unstoppable. And the only thing that gets in my way is disempowered thinking that leads to emotions that trick me into believing I don't feel like doing that call today, or I don't feel like doing the thing, or this person, is pissing me off. And so I don't want to follow through with whatever I'm following through with at the time. It boils down to emotions and they get us off track and limit us in such a huge way until now. Together, we are stopping this cycle today. So We know that our emotions take us off track. We know that emotions aren't concrete, that I have different emotions than you do, that we get triggered in different ways because of our life experience. But what's so fascinating to me is as we've gone through these addictions, right? The different addictions that I've presented to you, that emotions actually pertain to each addiction. Emotions are essentially the glue that keep the other addictions I've talked to you about in place. Why can't we break through? Why do we get stuck? Why do we stay in relationships or patterns or jobs or situations longer than we should? It seriously all boils down to emotions. And friends, this is so exciting to me. I hope you can feel the energy in my voice and come alongside me today as you listen to this episode, because unlocking this is so massive. And it is so exciting for me to be talking about this with you today because there's so much freedom on the other side of this. Okay. So, as I said, our emotions are the glue that keep us stuck in our other addictions. And so, what I want to do today is actually take you through what I mean by that and dive into our different addictions and show you how it links to your emotions. So, the first addiction I presented to you in this 8-part series was victim consciousness. So, emotions play a huge role in keeping you stuck and feeling like you're a victim. If you look at life and you look at, any examples in life where you feel hopeless or powerless or feel like you don't have a choice or that something is happening to you, it starts to happen as a sequence. What I mean by that is something will happen. You feel like you don't have the power to choose. You may feel stuck. You may feel hopeless. You may feel dissatisfied at first. That dissatisfaction can turn into a hopeless feeling or a powerless feeling. When you feel powerless, you may feel discouraged. You may feel like you don't have a lot of energy. If you start to notice what happens when you feel like you don't have a choice, is you feel disempowered. And so that emotional state is keeping you in feeling like a victim longer than necessary. But we have to see that this is happening because when we feel like life is happening to us, when we feel like we don't have a choice, we can easily get stuck. And as it plays out, as it relates to our emotions and victim consciousness, emotionally, we start to feel bad. We start to feel discouraged. That then leads us to believe that we don't have a choice, that we're victim to this person or this situation or whatever the dynamic is that we're in. The feelings that we have, the emotions that we have about being a victim is what keeps us there. And so if you can start to see that when you feel hopeless, that there is a certain emotion that goes along with that feeling, then you can start to see, just as our dear friend Viktor Frankl said so beautifully, that between stimulus and response, there is a choice. There is our power to choose our happiness and freedom. So when you feel hopeless, know that there is a space to choose a new emotion. It's just you haven't realized that the emotion that's going on when you feel hopeless is so powerful that you can't see your way through the trees, right? You can't see your way through it because it's so ingrained. So see how your emotions really keep you stuck in that victim belief. Emotions like guilt, emotions like shame. When you beat yourself up, because you didn't do as well as you could have done, or you were disappointed in some way, You have an opportunity to choose a new emotion, and that will help you out of victim consciousness.
A conscious and connected leader and executive team is truly the future of successful organizations. The Truth Teachers are proud to announce that we are now offering corporate packages to create more consciousness in the workplace. If you are looking to impact the C-suite or your executive teams in a powerful way, we help CEOs and teams claim their power, take radical ownership, release patterns and programs that limit their capability to lead, and activate them as conscious and powerful leaders so they not only can impact the organization, but that their conscious leadership can impact all of the clients that they serve. If you're interested in learning more, please click the link in the show notes, and we look forward to speaking with you further about creating conscious workplaces, because those truly are the future of successful organizations.
So when you feel, let's just say, guilt, if you can see that you have the power to choose a new meaning, you have the power to choose a new belief or emotion, feeling, that's going to help you pave the way out of victim consciousness. Let's go into addiction 2. So in this series, the title of the second addiction was Disorder and Problems. So let's think about this for a moment. When we have problems or disorder in our lives, how do we feel? We feel hopeless. You're going to see very quickly how this all cascades down into one another. Each of these addictions ties into another, and that's why we are stuck in this cobweb, everyone. Like, this is why we, no matter what we try, no matter what conference or personal development or what strategy we apply, we cannot see our way through. We keep getting stuck because this is a huge cobweb we weave. Okay, so when there are problems in our life, those problems trigger different emotions. And when we focus on problems, what happens internally is there are literally hormones, chemicals in our brain that create a concoction that excite us unconsciously to stay in problems. Now, some people really like being in problems because it excuses them from the table of greatness. For you, that may not be true. You may say, Stacy, this is ridiculous. I don't want problems in my life. I totally am with you. This is how it's playing out then for you unconsciously, is that if you're having problems in your life and you don't want those problems, the focus on those problems is creating a concoction in your brain. That concoction of emotions is what is continuing to create the chaos and disorder in your life. And so if you can bring your attention to what emotions am I feeling when these problems are arising, you can identify those emotions and then start choosing new emotions to get acquainted with, to start defining yourself by, so that those don't run you anymore. You see, part of what happens is that we have the same problems, right? Some people, they have problems in their relationship. Other people, may have problems around their finances. We as humans have picked our poison. And what we have to know is that we have the antidote. We have the ability to create a new reality if we start to look at our emotions, because that's what's keeping us stuck in the story or the problems. Which segues into addiction number 3. Addiction number 3 in this series was our addiction to stories. So by telling a story about the problems like we just talked about, that creates a feeling. We feel a certain way when we tell the story of disempowerment. We feel a completely different way when we tell the story of empowerment. And so at the end of the day, when we tell a story, we are fulfilling that unconscious belief that we don't have a choice. But if we can start to see that there is an emotional hit you are getting when you tell a story about your problems, there is an emotional hit that you get when you tell a story about why something isn't working. You also get an emotional hit when you tell a story about what is working. So please direct your attention to the emotional hit that you get when you tell the story of what is working, because we want to tell more stories about that. The next addition is triggers. We so often will get triggered, and that's what sets off this emotional roller coaster, right? Your partner says something that triggers you because you think they should be different than they are. Let's just be honest. We all want our partners to be different than they are on some level, right? And so someone looks at us wrong. Your partner doesn't look at you the right way or responds to you in a way that you feel is inappropriate. The story that you tell, again, this weaves back into the last addiction. The story that you tell is that you feel a certain way because they looked at you wrong. But my friends, we are choosing how we feel. It is not because they looked at you wrong. It is not because you missed that business deal. It is not because of the thing. When you blame it on that external thing, you are saying it is bigger than me. And my dear podcast listeners, nothing is bigger than you. Nothing is. When you decide to end this cycle and see the truth, which is the buck stops with you, it's game over and you can start to consciously create. This takes us into our next episode of patterns, right? When we have a pattern playing out in our lives, when we can see that our triggers causes our patterns and how unconscious the patterns are, the patterns are kind of like the blanket that tucks in our emotions, right? And so if you can start to see that the pattern sometimes it covers up our emotional state as it relates to whatever pattern is playing out in our life. And so we can easily get lost in the pattern thinking that really what we do is we don't even see the pattern, right? But if we can start bringing our attention to the truth, which is what's underneath the pattern? What do I feel when this dynamic with this individual plays out? And start to see that, oh, wow, what if my emotions are driving the patterns? I get to essentially crash this entire dysfunctional empire I've built if I can really look at that underlying pattern. And then lastly, validation. This is not the last one, excuse me. Validation. So with validation, what validation shows us is as it relates to emotions, we constantly are seeking emotional safety and emotional worthiness by external validation. Flipping that script to internal validation is truly the antidote to this pattern. But can you see that with validation, how emotions are so intertwined? If instead we understood that we have the power to choose how we feel in any moment, we no longer have to seek external validation. We no longer have to seek that safety outside of us because we're safe. And I'm going to actually even go out on a limb and say, have we been chasing validation because we never understood that we have the power to choose how we feel? So we go through our whole lives trying to validate, trying to self-soothe because our emotions are so uncomfortable and we feel so bad, when all we needed to know that there was space between stimulus and our response, and that space is our power to choose. And the last one, this is the last one for real, self-sabotage. We self-sabotage because, like I said in our last episode, we don't feel worthy and we don't feel safe. Well, under that underlying emotion of not feeling worthy is what we need to take a look at. When we look at that emotion and we can see why we don't feel worthy, why we feel insecure, we can stop self-sabotaging. It's kind of like emotions are this best kept secret in a way that if we can start really getting our emotions in check, everything else changes. And instead of reacting to life, we're creating life, right? Instead of moving through the world as if someone else is our driver, we get to take our power back. So, what's the way through? So much of the work that I do is a lot of times awareness alone is enough. And only you know, right? You may listen to this episode today and you may say, wow, just bringing awareness to my emotional state is helping me uncover this next level of growth for myself. But this one really takes awareness and action, because you can't just be aware of the emotions. You also have to consciously make effort to change it. What do I mean by that? Well, that looks like catching yourself in that next conversation and seeing that you reacted and seeing, okay, next time I'm going to be mindful of how I respond and how I feel. And so then the next time it's more effort, but it's just like lifting that next level of weights at the gym. It's not always heavy, right? All of a sudden that 10-pound dumbbell is like the 5-pound once felt. And this is the exercise around emotions. So like always, I want to give you some practical, actionable steps. And like I said in our episode when we began, we are going to unpack this in future episodes because there is so much to this topic. I want to go specific with you guys. I want to get feedback from you. Like if there is something that really awakened in you after listening to this episode, I want to hear about it so that we can take your questions and make more episodes so that we're speaking directly to your needs, wants, and what's going to help you grow the fastest. So let's just go through a few actionable tips to take this episode deeper. Step 1 is, like I said a moment ago, see how you've been run by your emotions and bring an attention to those patterns. Step 2, see how at the end of the day, we all blame external things for how we feel. And I'm going to reference this quote again. Just like Viktor Frankl beautifully said, between stimulus and response is our freedom to choose. So just see the truth that you have reacted in more ways than one. See the truth that you've blamed external things so that you don't have to be conscious of your emotions. Again, this is not intentional. You're not going through the world consciously saying this, right? This is our unconscious addictions. Step 3, listen back to the other episodes and even consider, like I said in the beginning of this episode, consider listening to the other episodes again in quiet with a notebook, not multitasking, if that's the way that you consume episodes, and see what else comes through. But connect your emotions to each of the other addictions that we have covered in this series and see if you can knock the cobweb down. And the last step is see areas in your life that you can observe where your emotions have been running you. See if you can observe that in some areas you find yourself more often in fight or flight. See if there's other areas that you get more triggered and really what emotions are beneath the trigger that the trigger is trying to protect. Because if you can start to look at these other addictions in this series as almost the blanket that covers emotions, you're going to have direct access to your subconscious, what's been going on, so that you can really extract that once and for all. Thank you so much for your gift of time and attention and being with me in this episode and the other episodes on Addiction to Awakening. I'm thrilled, excited to have shared this series with you and to go deeper as we continue with future episodes. And we will see you next week. Are you experiencing change and breakthroughs as you listen to Becoming? If so, show us some love and hit the subscribe button, leave a review, and share an episode. I love bringing this content to you each week, and together, listener by listener, we can wake up the world. See you next week.